From battlefield to bomb shelter, from home front to hospital, from volunteer rosters to victims lists, women experience war in distinctive, gendered ways. These are their stories. These are their voices. Welcome to Voices of Women at Wartime, a podcast by the Center for Women's Justice. I'm Rachel Stomel.
And I'm Rivka Lubitsch.
Voices of Women at Wartime examines how women affect war and how war affects women. These are the unique perspectives and testimonies of women in their own words, a candid conversation that is sometimes hopeful, sometimes heartbreaking, but always honest and always essential.
So before we introduce our guest, I was thinking, Rachel, we have a podcast about Voices of Women at Wartime. We're voices, we're women, and we're at wartime. So why don't we say something personal about ourselves? So you tell me something that's you're feeling or you're thinking or anything that's changed in your life, just one short thing, and I'll tell you something about a discussion that I had with my granddaughter.
So here's a little story about something that when I think back on it, it's like, what? But at the time, it seems so normal to me. The first Friday night after the war broke out, and all the stories of the horrific things were very fresh in our minds. You know, we had no idea what to expect, and something could happen at any time. And especially those of us who have kids, I think, were really nervous about everything. So it was Friday night, and we were at the Shabbat table, and I was serving chicken soup to my family. And in our living room, we know where we sit, it's close to a balcony. And as I was ladling soup into a bowl, I was thinking to myself, if a terrorist showed up right now on the balcony, could I take this boiling pot of soup and throw it at them and use that as a weapon? Would that be something that I could do without injuring my kids in the way? And it was just such a natural thought that I had. And later thinking about it, that's very messed up.
Yes, totally messed up.
Yeah, chicken soup was supposed to be our most comforting, homey Jewish thing. And I was thinking, how can I take that and use it as a weapon to save my family from being killed? I feel like that's a perfect example of Jewish trauma, how our comforting things are mixed together with our traumatic things. And that's our life now. And hopefully it won't be like that anymore, because that's not normal.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you something else that's completely not normal. I went over to watch over my grandchildren because my son is in the Army in the reserve, just like I'm usually watching over my grandchildren here because my son-in-law is in the Army and I'm helping my daughter. So I was there helping my daughter-in-law. And of course, my granddaughter wasn't sleeping and she came down to sit with me and chat. And I said to her, and I know she likes dogs, and I said to her, I'm thinking of taking a dog. Maybe I'll rescue one of those dogs that were from those families that were murdered, because I know there are a lot of dogs that were left and roaming around. I think there are 200 dogs that need to be rescued or something from that area. And she looked at me and said, what are you talking about? Families weren't killed. Maybe you had one person killed, but...
How old is she? How old is this?
She's 10 years old. So I said, I didn't know what to say. I was she caught me not focused, and I don't really know which grandchild knows what and what they tell to each family. So I said, I didn't say anything, I think. And then she looked at me and she said, well, even if 3 or 4 people were killed, there's always somebody else in the family to take care of the dog. So I said, yeah, you're right. They probably don't need me to help them out with the dogs. So then that was really a weird conversation.
Very hard to figure out what's age appropriate for each kid and what they need to know so that when they hear something from someone else, they'll be prepared and you could be the one to frame it for them. But on the other hand, you don't want to expose them to things that they don't necessarily need to know. And how much do we need to know these days? I don't know. When you're a kid, it's very hard as a parent or a grandparent in this case.
Okay, so since October 7th, hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes. Some of them got official orders from the government to evacuate and were sent to other places. Entire kibbutzim have emptied out and moved into hotels or into other kibbutzim that were willing to host them. Families from cities moved to other cities. People from religious towns moved to Bnei Brak and are hosted by the ultra-religious community there. In Nir Etzion, where I live, there's a hotel that's now hosting a group of new immigrants from Ethiopia. And not only has the southern area been evacuated, but the northern part of Israel also is being evacuated because there's a threat from the northern borders. Today we're talking to Rina Levanon, a friend of mine from Kfar Blum, which is about 6 kilometers away from the northern border. She's left her home and she's been living with her 3 children as a guest on a different kibbutz for weeks now, while her husband is still back in Kfar Blum. Hi, Rina.
Hi.
First, if you could tell us a bit about yourself. What do you normally do in regular times when it's not war?
So when it's not war, what I usually do is I work as a teacher of Judaism in different places, and also as a writer and as a facilitator of mostly weddings, but Jewish services, bar and bar mitzvahs. That's the work that I do. I deal with Judaism, although I'm a kibbutznik and a secular Jew, and I deal with cultural Judaism. I meet a
Wait, are
lot of
you
people.
Reform or conservative, or
So
you call yourself secular?
that's a hard question to answer at the moment.
Okay.
So I would call myself secular for most of my life. So I've been a professional Jew for almost 20 years now. So this is what I do. But in the past few years, I'm getting closer to the Reform movement. I'm actually learning to be a Reform rabbi.
Right, because
Wow.
I
So
thought you
that's what
were
I'm
a
doing right
Reform
now.
rabbi.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not a Reform rabbi yet because because I grew up as a kibbutznik, as a very secular kibbutznik. Reforms always looked to me they were too religious. That's how I looked at it. It wasn't my Judaism. It wasn't like the kibbutz Judaism that I was brought up upon. So it took me a long while to understand that I am interested in things like prayer or things like, reading from the Siddur, because Talmud or Bible were things that I was always interested in, and I learned it myself, and then I taught it in a way that was secular to me, that you could ask all the difficult questions, that you could deal with all the difficult issues, and there's no God, so to speak, because you could ask all the questions that you want to ask. And I looked at Reformed congregations, and it was too religious for me.
Let's go into the wartime thing.
Yes.
So first tell us what it's like to live so close to the border. How has it been in years before? Have there been evacuations before? Have there been rockets coming down on you? Or have you been to the shelter or whatever?
So I actually grew up in Kfar Blum, right next to the border. This is where I was brought up. And then I left when I was about 20 to explore the world. And I lived in different parts of Israel and also abroad. And I came back with my family about 7 years ago, and we built our home there. So there's like my childhood part of things. And then as a mother, as a grown up to live there. And it's different. As a child, I was brought up in a war zone many times. A lot of my life, I spent months in bomb shelters. We had our bomb shelter culture of who we played with and how we slept there. And they would always take us and evacuate us. But it was always explained to us as a fun trip that we're taking to the Sea of Galilee or to Eilat, and it was fun. It was like, okay, we're going to Eilat for 2 weeks, and people were always hosting us in the nicest way. But we also spent months in bomb shelters. And we had, like, back in the 80s when I grew up, there was also terrorists coming into Israel. Nothing was close to the scale of what we just experienced now. It was always 2, 3, 10 terrorists coming from Lebanon, but it was very, very scary as a child. I remember myself being alone with my mom in what was known as the night of the gliders. I don't know if you remember that. It was back in the 80s where terrorists penetrated Israel on a glider from Lebanon, and he landed right next to Kiryat Shmona, which is the town next to us. And the whole area was a war zone. We were asked to go into our homes and lock our doors and just wait.
It was one terrorist?
I think it was just one person who made it that time. There were other incidents where a few came in and took in a kibbutz called Misgavam, a group of
They took
terrorists
hostages or something, or they had hostages there,
right,
holding them in a room.
That was also in the 80s. They went into a children's home because the children lived in a special house for the kids. That was
Let's just explain that on a kibbutz
yeah.
in the past, not today. children used to sleep together in a bet yeladim, the children's house, and not with the parents. That's very unfamiliar to whoever doesn't know what a kibbutz is about. They don't do that in any kibbutzim today.
No,
They don't have
not
the
anymore.
children's.
And also, I
anymore.
wasn't brought up like that because
Good.
in my kibbutz, they ended it very, soon. Mostly my mom, who couldn't, think of the fact that her children would live in a different place than her. But there in Misgavam, the kibbutz that we were talking about, it was still they still lived like that in the 80s, and terrorists came in and took hostages. What I was telling you about is the night of the gliders. Is I was with my mom at home, and the terrorists landed right next to Kiryat Shmona, and we didn't know where the incident really happened. And it was night, and it was just daylight outside from like they light up the sky with bombs of this looks like daylight.
Because there was no WhatsApp then, so nobody knew what was going on anyplace. You only had the radio. You didn't even have TV going on all day. You just had the radio to listen to.
No.
So people didn't know what was going on in the minute,
Right. I don't know what's better, though.
Yeah.
How old were you at the time?
I think I was about 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you have all these memories of, as a kid, the ones that you described as being fun, now we're going spontaneously on a trip and, and all these other things, and the things
Right.
that were scary that you remember like that. And now as a adult and as a mother experiencing war, how is it now different for you and whatever's going on?
And how did you actually decide to come back? If it was, I'm just sorry for
Right.
slipping in that question, but
Right. It was a big question whether or not to come back. It was a tough question, not only because of security reasons, also because to be so away from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and everything that's happening is a big decision, career-wise, health-wise, education-wise, and so on. But that's a different topic. I think to your question, Rachel, it's like to be a mom. It's now I'm the one holding let's go on a fun trip. I'm on that side now. So
How old are your kids now?
I have one girl who's 6.5. So she's in the first grade, an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old.
Are your parents still there? Are they
My
alive
parents are
in the
there,
kibbutz?
and they're not going anywhere. The entire generation,
You're
my
kidding.
parents and their friends, they're there. They feel like it's the safest place on earth for them to be, and they're not going anywhere. They have friends of them are going to the gate whenever there's and they're like watching the kibbutz. Like they're not going. They're not leaving.
So you also said that your husband is still back in the kibbutz, in the Hamal. Tell us a little about that. What's he
Right.
doing?
Yeah, but it's not like he's not like a big commander or anything. He's just, they have Hamal is like a war room, but it's a very big name for where they coordinate everything. Like if anything happens, they will coordinate, whatever's coming in, all the information coming from the army and the information coming from inside the kibbutz. In every kibbutz, there's a kitat konenut, like a small group of men and sometimes
Emergency
women too.
squad. I looked it up the other day on
Squad.
Google. It's emergency squad.
squad.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're developing them now because they saw how much it was needed in the southern area. So now even in where I live, they're teaching them and getting them to practice holding guns and whatever. Even though we're in the middle of, we're in the northern part. We're not in a dangerous part, but we also now have a Hamal, a Chadar Milchama, what did you call it in English? A war
room.
It's a war room, but no, a coordinating room, and it's open 24 hours a day. So we have youngsters sitting there just in case something happens.
Yeah.
They can coordinate.
I think for us, it was mostly like there's a war going on and we need to be part of what's done, So we couldn't just leave our kibbutz, the two of us, and not be a part of defending it and not be a part of that.
You made the decision that you and the kids would evacuate.
Right.
And your husband would stay there. So you're both contributing to the war effort and making sure everyone's safe, but you're also taking care personally of your own kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
You told me beforehand that some places were evacuated formally, officially, and some places it's just like voluntarily or whatever you want to call it. You've decided on your own. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean?
Well, basically, the government decided that, the official evacuation is all the kibbutzim or the moshavim or like the small towns who are 5 kilometers away from the border. Within that scale, all of those will be evacuated formally, which means that they get either they're staying together as a community in a hotel, or they get, if they don't want to do that, they get a small sum of money so they can stay somewhere else, and they're being taken care of, so to speak. And my kibbutz is 6 kilometers away, or 6.2, something of that. So we're not in the official
You're not in
evacuation.
the range.
Yeah, we're not in the range, exactly.
Does that mean that you also don't qualify for government help then? If
Nothing. Yeah, we don't qualify for anything. But like when you live there, you're in a war zone. And also, like, we were told by our local municipality that like the good thing to do is now to leave and let the army do what the army needs to do. Like, it was documented that they really encouraged us to leave. And I was still, it took me like a day or two. I was still there, and it was very scary. I was brought up there, and I had all those traumas from being a kid and everything that happened down south. It was really surprising to us because growing up there, I had my plan of what I would do as a kid, what I would do when the terrorists will come.
Oh,
I knew
God.
exactly.
See, your chicken soup thing, Rachel,
Exactly.
You had people before that planning things.
Yeah, I had my chicken soup planned for years. As a
kid,
kid,
having to think about that, like that's not what kids should be worried about.
Yeah, but this is how we grew up. You know, I knew that when they come, I would go to the dining room because there was a lot of food there. In my plan, like, everyone died but me. That was, and I would go to the dining room. There would be enough food there for me to until someone would come and rescue me, and I had like the path I would take and so on. And all of that happened. It just didn't happen in our border. It happened, down south. But it was really what we were afraid of for years. And the last year or two, there was all kinds of like noises from the border.
And you thought they were building tunnels.
Exactly. They were building tunnels.
They are.
Yeah, they were. A few years ago, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, tunnels were discovered coming from Lebanon underground into Israel, and people were hearing them digging.
That's the scariest thing. You could freak out thinking that a terrorist can just pop up in the middle of your house. It can be in your room or someone else's room or outside. That is totally unimaginable.
It also makes you really paranoid every time you hear a noise and you're like, is that just something normal or is it the worst thing? It could be one.
Which is, by the way, what I said to my granddaughter when I was there, that if you hear somebody flushing the toilet at night, it's not a terrorist, it's just me. If a terrorist comes in, I actually said this to a 10-year-old girl, he won't be flushing the toilet or taking things out of the refrigerator. It's just me eating a sandwich.
Yeah, so I was telling you about the evacuation moment. So we stayed there for a day or two, and we saw all the neighbors were leaving. I was there with my kids in the street, and you see this like no cars in the driveways, and people are leaving. And it was just I had this agreement with my brother. My brother is actually like the chairman of the local association in the kibbutz. So he would tell me when he thinks that it's the time to leave, and he was like, "Okay, my family's
now
leave.
leave.
Maybe you should go." And we had our bags packed since Saturday. Because no one knew, no one knew. It felt like it could be just like the beginning of something that would happen.
Right. We thought that there would be an attack from the northern part also.
Right. So, yeah, eventually we just went in. We went to the car and we just drove away. Yeah.
So how did you decide to go to Bet Hashita?
So, at first I went.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I went and stayed with my sister a little bit. And then, like, the kibbutz movement is there's a lot to say about the kibbutz movement, but at this point, like, it suffered the most damage and harm, but it was an amazing like things that happened in the kibbutzim in the past few weeks are just amazing. So kibbutz Bet Hashita as a kibbutz approached kibbutz Kfar Blum and said, "You're welcome to come and stay with us." and people evacuated their apartments, and people who got divorced got back and lived together to clear their apartments, or amazing things. I'm now staying at an apartment of a soldier who's fighting down south, and his mom gave his apartment to us for as long as we need it. So, and they're also helping us with everything that we need. All kinds of, they brought us beds, and they brought us blankets, and they brought us everything that we need, basically. They bring food in, and cakes, and and dinner invitations, and they do the washing for us, and laundry.
And the children, what about the kids? Do they learn in the school there? Are they with their friends? Do they have some kind of a structure to their
So
day?
the first two
Is it...
weeks was just like the vacations I had when I was a kid, whenever we were attacked. It was like, let's do all the fun things there are to do in this area. So we went to the Sachne, we went swimming, we went hiking, we went to museums, and it's really hard. So like I'm doing this in the morning, and at nights I'm sitting and I'm reading all the stories, and I'm crying all night, and then in the morning it's like fun time. This is our so, and we actually meet everyone that we know here. We go swimming, and we meet in the Sachne, where we go here next to Betchan. We meet everyone that we know from home, because everyone's like scattered around Israel. And after the first 2 weeks, I approached the school here, and I asked them if they could take both of my girls in. So my girls are now in a school here in Bet Hashita, and after another week, my son went in the school too, in Charod, which is a kibbutz nearby. So they're now in a new life, basically, here.
How did you explain it to them that you were moving and you were going to be in a new place and you don't know for how long?
Right. They're not that young anymore. So my son is exposed to everything, basically.
He has a smartphone.
Yes.
Also, I'm really trying with my own kids. My daughter's 15, and we had a discussion about like there's going to be things that people are sending on WhatsApp, and don't watch videos and don't look at pictures. And if you need to know anything, like, we can talk and we can ask and whatever, but like for your own, health, like you're going to regret if you watch things. It's very hard with kids that age because they want to be exposed and they want to be connected to their friends. That's
Right.
really important for them, but also they don't necessarily have the judgment to know when to expose themselves to things that could be really traumatic.
Right. We had that conversation too. And I want to believe that he took that in, and he didn't watch any of those horrific videos that went on. But still, like, he's watching the news, and that's enough. The news on its own is horrific.
In some of the families here, they don't watch the news at all, so kids don't even know. I mean, they know from each other, but the parents, my daughter won't watch the news when her children are awake.
Yeah. Well, my 6-year-old doesn't watch the news, and I never watched, like, I didn't watch the news for the first month or so, because I was never alone. I was always with them. So I didn't expose them to that.
Do they know about the captives? Because that's the worst of
Yes.
the worst.
So we thought, it's funny because we're together all the time, because we moved from one place to the other, and we're all sleeping in the same room, like we're together all the time. So my 14-year-old watches things, and then he comes to me and he wants to discuss it. And this the 6-year-old is around. And in an ideal world, I would never expose my 6-year-old to that. And I thought I wasn't exposing it to it. And then her dad called, and she said, "Dad, what about all those hostages? When do you think they'll come back?" And we were amazed, because we thought like that she's in her own world and she doesn't know anything about it. But
Kids absorb everything, whether you want them to or not. Not just things that you say and hear, but they pick up also on your feelings. They pick up on your fear and on your anxiety. So it's very hard as a parent to have to regulate that all the time.
Yeah.
You really have no idea when you're going back home.
No.
And that's also a very insecure feeling, that they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
You or the kids, right?
But like the moment we landed in a school, things change. And for me, what I'm focusing on is, I have a first grade. We're learning the alphabet. That's what we're doing. And I'm really focused on that. Like the teacher was amazed. She's like, "Wow, you're really focused on like learning. How could you be so focused on that? But I feel like this is what will, big words, yeah, but this is what will rescue us right now, to learn the alphabet. That's what we need to do. Let's focus on that, and then we planted a small garden here for the soldier when he comes back, that he has, yeah, that he has like some like flowers next to his house when he comes back. And that's what we do. That's what I try to focus on. Let's go to bat. Like my older daughter and my son, they're playing basketball. So we found the local teams and we're in the teams now, and we're focusing on the now, basically. I think that's, for them, it's amazing. That's what they need to do right now.
And what are you focusing on to help yourself, to save yourself? I know that I'm doing dot painting and quilling.
I don't really have time to even think about that, to be honest. And I think that's, in a way, it's helpful for me. I don't know, if I was still at my own house, having all the time in the world, I think it would have been much harder for me to cope. When you're exposed to the stories, and that's what you're absorbing all day, because I know, like, if I was back home, I would just spend my entire day just reading the stories, watching the news, thinking about it, and I don't have time to even deal with it. I spend like my hours at nights reading it because I can't help myself. And also, for me, because it was so many kibbutzes that were damaged so hard, it's the same landscape that I was brought up in. It looks exactly the same. All kibbutzes look the same. We always say that you can find your way to the dining room with just land in a kibbutz, you'll find a dining room. So this is the landscape I was brought up in, and to see it destroyed and burnt, and to hear all those stories. If I had time to just be with that, would have been much harder for me. And now I have to cope. I have to do the laundry. I have to teach the alphabet. I have to go to basketball practice. That's what I do. I have to make dinner,
Now, having a routine is very helpful to just keep you grounded and to give you something to take your mind off of things and that feels normal. So speaking of normal, thank you so much for sharing your not normal situation with us. And I hope that next time when you speak with us, it will be in happier, more peaceful times. You really sound like, as difficult and challenging and unpredictable as all this is, that you're handling it, with amazing strength and courage, as a mom and as a person. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Thank you to our listeners. By listening to this podcast, you are a witness. Giving these voices your attention means giving them power. If you, like us, agree that women's stories are essential to the Israeli narrative, subscribe to the Voices of Women at Wartime wherever you get your podcast, and encourage your friends to listen and subscribe too. If you have thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on social media, on our personal accounts, as well as on the Center for Women's Justice's page on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Stay tuned for more Voices of Women in our upcoming episodes. Thank you, Rabbi Scott Kahn, for the recording and editing. I am Rivka Lubitch, and I was here with Rachel Stomel. Be well and stay safe.